I won my only 2025 NFL mock draft. As of course, at the time of this recording, we are about 10 days out from the time you guys are listening to this until the NFL draft. And this has been one of the most interesting, one of the most weird NFL draft lead ups I could remember because it's a draft where there's not a ton of top end talent, and there's even a debate of who that top end talent is. And there are positions like offensive line, like defensive line, like tight end, and like running back that are very deep. And I don't see a lot of trades for happening in this year's draft. I think there's going to be a couple. Um, I think there's some veteran coaches and some veteran general managers that definitely see some value in trading back. But with the depth of the defensive line, with the depth, as always, in the draft of wide receiver, with the depth of running back, it's going to be very interesting to see. There's obviously your top prospects, but then there's a huge debate about the middle prospects, and that even includes the quarterback position. Some think that we're going to get, 3, 4 quarterbacks in the first round. So others think we may get, 1 to 2 quarterbacks in the first round. So it's one of the weirdest draft processes I can remember going through. But this is, as I do every single year, my one, my only 2025 NFL mock draft. It does include trades, and we're going to go selection picks 1 through 32. Hang in there with me for the ride. As always, my social media links are in the description below. With that, the Tennessee Titans are on the clock with the number 1 overall pick, and this is no mystery without a doubt. They are selecting Cam Ward out of Miami, Florida. Cam Ward is seen as the best prospect in this year's draft. Now, he does not have an elite arm, and you heard my conversation with Christian Eden last week. We talked about Cam Ward, about the fact of, sometimes he does feel like maybe that he just shows up on Sundays and plays. But his ability to make good tight window throws, his playmaking, his mobile ability, he does not throw the football down the field a lot, which for Tennessee is not that much of a concern because they don't have a lot of weapons yet, and he is going to be coached by an offensive coach in Brian Callahan. Tennessee has fell in love with Cam Ward from the beginning. He is seen as the best overall well-rounded quarterback. Tennessee cannot bring back Will Levis again. Will Levis cost them at least 4 games last season. I think Tennessee could get their franchise quarterback of the future here. They're not going to trade the pick. They're taking Cam Ward. Now the draft really does start at number 2, and it's a debate for the Browns of will they go with a Sheduer Sanders, very controversial, if you will, quarterback out of Colorado. Also out of Colorado, you have the DB slash wide receiver, Travis Hunter, and you also have essentially Micah Parsons 2.0 with the body, the build, the playmaking ability, and he went to the same school, wears the same number as well, number 11, Abdul Carter out of Penn State. At this time, it seems like Sheduer Sanders is dropping down draft boards where he could be there for the Saints if they want him at 9. He could be there for the Steelers if they want him at 21. It does feel like that Sheduer will be dropping at least into the teens in the draft, in my opinion. Then it comes down to, do the Browns want to take Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter? And they did just sign Myles Garrett to that contract, $40 million a year. I've been very adamant on my shows. You guys have heard my thoughts on that I think the Browns should have traded Myles Garrett. It would have made this pick a lot easier. Abdul Carter would have been a slam dunk pick. You know my thoughts on Travis Hunter, too. I think in last year's draft class, Travis Hunter is an outside the top 10 pick. Some people view him as the next great wide receiver in the NFL. I don't. I think he's more of a defensive back in the NFL, and I don't think defensive backs are worth this kind of investment. And you might as well put Abdul Carter next to Myles Garrett and have a pass rush there in Cleveland for the next half decade. I think the Browns will solve their quarterback situation later, whether it's with Kirk Cousins or maybe another free agent. I think Abdul Carter goes number two to the Cleveland Browns. And then with that, the Giants then would take Travis Hunter. Again, I think Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, they go 2-3. It just really depends on do the Browns take Abdul Carter or do they take Travis Hunter. For Travis Hunter, he would definitely be the best defensive back on the Giants, and he'd probably be their best wide receiver outside of Malik Neighbors, obviously, and giving Russell Wilson. Again, I think for the Giants, right? They have Brian Dable and Joe Shane, the general manager. That combination has to win this year, or they're going to be canned. Um, there's a reason why they brought in two veterans in Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. I don't think they go after a quarterback here. Travis Hunter, by all metrics, is the best player on the board at this point, which is why they go with Travis Hunter. So now, New England. After, there was a lot of smoke around could the Browns take Sheduer Sanders? Well, New England was sitting there saying, okay, well, we're going to get either Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter. Now that Sheduer is more than likely, in my opinion, not going to go to Cleveland or New York, New England, who has struggled a lot with the offensive line, and we know Mike Vrabel is a big, tough, physical guy who, rebuilt the offensive line there when he was in Tennessee. Will Campbell, the offensive lineman out of LSU, he is a patient blocker with good speed. Now, some people do think that he has some short arms enough that he could play left guard in the NFL. New England needs help at offensive line everywhere. Campbell did play left tackle in college. That's where he's at least going to come out as an outside tackle. Again, outside of Morgan Moses, which New England got at right tackle in free agency from the Jets. They need a completely new offensive line. They lost David Andrews this offseason as well at center. We know they need playmakers for Drake May. I don't think that Ted McMillan out of Arizona, I don't think he's worth that pick at four yet. And I don't see New England picking Ashton Jenty as long as they still have Ramondre Stevenson on the roster at four. So that's why I think they go offensive lineman. They'll fill other skill position gaps later on in the draft. Now, Mason Graham, I love here. I think that the Jaguars, in my opinion, get the second best player in the draft right behind Abdul Carter at number five. I think Mason Graham is Abdul Carter, a defensive tackle, basically. Fast, violent, relentless, great power, big man. He's going to be hard to block. He's very similar to Aiden Hutchinson when he was at Michigan, except he is on the interior. He made his presence known all season long last year for the Michigan Wolverines, and 2 years ago he was a dominant force in that run to the national championship. Jacksonville, they could go offensive line. They obviously need more receivers for Liam Cohen and Trevor Lawrence, but Mason Graham is the best player on the board. And again, I think this draft is going to be more about best players on boards. Speaking of best players on boards, we know Pete Carroll loves to run the football. And I have floated out there, is there a scenario where the Raiders, they trade up from 6-2 with Cleveland, they snap Sheduer Sanders? Absolutely. That is a scenario, in Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly in Las Vegas. They know they need a quarterback because they're in a division with Justin Herbert, with Patrick Mahomes, with Bo Nix, Sean Payton, Andy Reid, Justin Herbert. But Vegas, they need help everywhere, and they know it. There's a reason why they brought in Geno Smith. There's a veteran presence there. We know the Raiders love to run the football with Pete Carroll. We know that's his identity. We know they need a running back. You could make an argument here that the Jets could take or excuse me, the Raiders could take Amon Madui, the tackle out of Missouri. I actually have him going to the Jets next at 7. I think all these mocks have Ashton Gentry going to Vegas. I think if he falls there, number 6, Gentry is a 3-down, do it all back. Very reminiscent of a Bijan Robinson a couple years ago that went to Atlanta at 8, or even Saquon Barkley when he got drafted by the Giants at 2. Here at 6, I think Ashton Gentry goes to the Raiders. And I said, Ahmad Mamboudi, the tackle out of Missouri, he goes next to the Jets, who have a new head coach in Aaron Glenn. They signed Justin Fields to play quarterback for them this season. There are some thoughts out there. Could the Jets take a Jalen Milrow? Could they take a Jackson Dart? Could they take Shador if he falls? I don't think they're going to. I think Aaron Glenn sees the Jets the same way that he helped build that team in Detroit. Excuse me. And what was Dan Campbell? First pick as the head coach of the Detroit Lions. It was Penei Sewell, the right tackle, set the tone for the entire rebuild. I think Amon Bandui, they got, the offensive lineman last year out of Penn State for them to play left tackle. This guy at right tackle now is going to protect that offensive line and give Justin Fields and Garrett Wilson and Brees Hall time to throw the football. Armand at 6'3", he may be small in height, but at 313 pounds, he's an excellent athlete. He's got a great stature and does not get beat off blocks very much. Now, the next pick, Ted McMillan, the wide receiver out of Arizona for Carolina. They definitely could go tight end here with Tyree Warren out of Penn State. I could totally see that pick. But McMillan is a controversial prospect because of the video that came out where he basically said that he doesn't watch film, that he just shows up on Sundays and balls out, which is an issue for me. In the NFL, you're going to have to do that, which is why for some teams, I think he's going to be completely off their draft boards. But there's controversy about whether this, was when he was just a freshman in high school, he wasn't truly taking football seriously before he got to Arizona. So there's a little bit of a debate on Ted McMillan, but the fact of the matter is, um, listen, on film, he looks like DK Metcalf. Huge catch radius, 6'5", and you pair him up with Xavier Legette, who's this big A.J. Brown type receiver from Ole Miss a year ago that Carolina got that is inconsistent at catching the football, but he can be a big body like target. Those two big body like targets for Bryce Young, who came on at the end of the year last year for that Dave Canales led crew. I think Carolina, listen, we know the draft is deep with receivers, but this draft in particular is also deep with tight ends. They could go receiver, they could go tight end, they could go offensive line with the first three picks. This is a really good draft for the Panthers to fill the needs that they have on their team as they continue to grow Bryce Young's development. To me, Ted's just such an insane talent at 6'5", plays above the rim, very physical, big body receiver that I don't think he slips past 8 unless Carolina does not fall in love with that video that I mentioned. Now, the Saints, they arguably have the most needs in the NFL at number 9. So I actually think they trade back with new head coach Kellen Moore. They get more picks and they move up with the Miami Dolphins, who, outside of Jalen Ramsey, their secondary really struggled last year. Their defense was not very good. And the best corner on the board here is Jadon Barron, the DB out of Texas. He's a versatile DB who can play all over the field, very good in man coverage. He gets his hands, on defenders. He can play the slot, he can play corner, he can play safety. And I think for Miami, a team who's invested a lot in Tua Tagovailoa, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, on the offense side of the ball, they know what their issue is defense, and they've invested a lot in their defensive line, aka Chop Robinson. Their secondary, again, Ramsey, Jalen Thompson are nice players, but they need to get a little bit younger, and I like this pick for them. They need a number 2 defensive back, and they move up and they get the best player on the board. Now, I think of Ashton Gentry's at 10. Ben Johnson, we saw what he did in Detroit with Jameer Gibbs and David Montgomery. He would lock in Ashton Gentry at 10 year for the Bears. You can make a case that the Bears are pretty solid on offense, outside of offensive line where they would need a left tackle. But again, with Amadi gone and Will Campbell gone, some of these tackles here are more towards the middle of the round, so they might trade back. but they have a safety on their roster already in Kevin Byard, and Malachi Starks out of Georgia plays just like him. He's physical, he can tackle, he can play safety, he can play slot corner. He's got very good ball hawking skills and has an attitude and very physical. And that's what Dennis Allen loves. And when you have Jalen Johnson already in that secondary being a lockdown corner for the new Bears defensive coordinator, who was a very good defensive coordinator when he was in New Orleans, not a great head coach, but a good defensive coordinator. He likes physical safeties. Think about Tyrann Mathieu in New Orleans. So I think this pick here makes a lot of sense for the Bears. Ben Johnson era starts with the best player on the board, in my opinion, at this point. Malachi starts out of Georgia. Now, San Francisco, they, in my opinion, are either going to go offensive or defensive line. And I think when you have a kid out of Marshall, we talked about this last year with Quinyon Mitchell when he came out of Toledo and obviously went to my Eagles at 22. When you have a guy in the MAC conference projected to go this high in the draft, he's just gonna work. And so, Green is more of a pass rusher than a run stuffer, but he's got a great first step. He'll be a good development project for new defensive coordinator Robert Saleh. San Francisco's lost the likes of Javon Hargrave and Kinlaw and some of those defensive pieces over the year. So to replenish that defensive line along with Nick Bosa as they try to rebuild and go young on that side of the ball with a Brock Purdy contract looming, I think that makes the most sense for San Francisco. Now, we all know Dallas needs a running back. We all know Dallas needs a receiver. We all know Dallas needs an offensive lineman. But I actually think knowing James Pierce, who is a very controversial athlete, he's outspoken, he's got a lot of penalties at Tennessee. And I think Jerry Jones, we've seen outside of Ezekiel Elliott, he does not draft skill position players that high. Again, running back Zeke, CeeDee Lamb. But I think that they see this James Pierce out of Tennessee as their their Demarcus Lawrence replacement. He's a very twitchy pass rusher, and you add Overshown and Micah Parsons into that mix for Matt Eberflus, who we know Eberflus can be a very good defensive coordinator, and Dallas already has their secondary set with Bland and Trayvon Diggs. I think again they have an offensive coach, but they make the defensive coordinator happy, get him more talent, and go younger on that side of the ball. James Pierce, the defensive end out of Tennessee. Now at 13, New Orleans, they would move back with Miami, and that's where Tyler Warren out of Penn State goes. He's as good of a pass catcher as Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers went 13 to the Raiders. I think that this guy, along with Chris Olave for the Saints, I don't know how good Kellen Moore is going to be there. It's like, yes, you have Evan Kamara. Olave is pretty good. Tyler Warren would be a great addition to a team that really does not have a tight end right now. They've been using Taysom Hill there for years. They need offensive line help. We know with the loss of Marshawn Lattimore last year at the trade deadline, they could definitely go corner. But I think Kellen Moore saw what Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni did in Philadelphia. He's going to say, get me weapons. They move back 4 spots. They take the best tight end on the board and give themselves another weapon to move forward when they eventually take the quarterback. But I think their thinking is, we're going to build this roster a little bit and then take the quarterback. So Indy, they have Anthony Richardson and they have Daniel Jones on the roster, so I don't think the quarterback is in the cards for this football team. So I think they just go with the best player available, and we know that over the years they've struggled on the defense side of the ball. They've not had a true blue linebacker since Shaq Leonard, which is what Jair Campbell out of Alabama is. He's a great tackler. He's an aggressive player with toughness. You add him to DeForest Buckner on that defensive front, and that front seven for Indianapolis just got better. They're pretty set at running back, obviously, with Jonathan Taylor and offensive line and receivers I like here. I think they could always snap another one in the second or third round. I think this is a case where, again, best player available here. They need an off ball linebacker desperately. For Atlanta, we know they have struggled to get after the pass rusher. Last year, they signed Matthew Judon, who did next to nothing. They are going to go in here and they look at Michael Penix and they say, okay, we got Drake London, we got Kyle Pitts, we got Bijan Robinson. You like their secondary that they've got with AJ Terrell leading the charge there. Calais Campbell is no longer there at defensive line. So they take Kenneth Grant, who's basically Mason Graham that Jacksonville picked, but he's less consistent. He's got good power for pass and run. He can get off blocks well. He's just he's more of a number two defensive tackle than a number one, but he's going to be a good impact player for Atlanta who does need defensive line help. And that means that Arizona, Jonathan Gannon and the Cardinals, we know Gannon loves his tough minded, physical, tall corners. And we go back to back Michigan picks here with Will Johnson, the DB out of Michigan, as he is the second DB now to fall into the first round. He is 6'2. He's a long outside corner, gets his hands on wide receivers. And again, Arizona, you like what they got. They just paid Trey McBride. You got Marvin Harrison on the offensive side of the ball. James Conner is still a decent running back, so you could make the case for the back out of North Carolina here for Arizona. But I think their secondary outside of Buda Baker is a complete mess. They haven't had a lockdown corner in ages, and that's where I think Jonathan Gannon goes here in the first round. It's no secret the Bengals need defense, and at this point, the best defensive player overall on the board is Walter Nolan, the DT out of Ole Miss, and he is 300 pounds. He's a mover inside. He'll be a good defender on rundowns. He reminds me a lot of Jordan Davis for the Philadelphia Eagles, and if Cincinnati does not have Trey Henderson back, they could go defensive end here. There's a couple. Malachi Williams out of Georgia, Donovan Azidu out of Boston College. But I think that Walter Nolan inside for Cincinnati because they really struggled against the run last year. They could not get an interior push. So that's where I think they go. The big man, Walter Nolan. I just mentioned Donovan Azizu. He's a good 3-4 outside linebacker, which is what Seattle now runs with Mike McDonald in charge. He's athletic off the edge. Think of him as a 3-4 outside linebacker slash 4-3 defensive end. I think Seattle, whose trouble last year with a defensive coach was defense. And yes, they did let go of DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, but they replaced that guy with Cooper Kupp. There's a lot of thought here that they could go with Njigba, the kid out of Ohio State, to pair him up with JSN. But I think the Cooper Kupp edition sort of knocked that, in my opinion. I think that they go after a defensive lineman here for the defensive coach. And same thing with Tampa. If you think about Tampa Bay's only weakness, right, it's their defense. And in my opinion, Malachi Williams, he's a hybrid player, which is what Todd Bowles loves to see in Tampa Bay. He's a long, strong, versatile edge prospect at 6'5", 300 pounds. He needs to develop a better first step, but he's better as a rusher against the pass on third down sub situations. We know Todd Bowles loves to blitz. We know what he does with different alignments and things like that. I think Malachi Williams out of Georgia fits that scheme very well. Now, at number 20 is originally the Denver Broncos. And this is a spot where, I think maybe even Tampa at 19 or Cincinnati at 17. Obviously, Cincinnati wouldn't deal with Cleveland, but if, say a Jets or a Browns at 20 with Denver, if they want to move in front of Pittsburgh to take a quarterback, I certainly think that could be possible. Though I think Houston is going to move in front of Denver. There's some thoughts here. Denver could take the running back out of North Carolina. They could take a receiver. They could take a tight end. Sean Payton's history is I'm going to find skill positions later on in the draft because I can coach them up well. And I'm going to focus more on the defensive side and the offensive line side of the ball early on in drafts. Houston desperately needs offensive linemen, right? After trading away Wormy Tunsil to Washington and then the offensive lineman Green they traded away to Philadelphia. So I think they get their Wormy Tunsil here. I think that they move up, they trade with Denver. They move up 5 spots and they take Josh Simons, the offensive tackle out of Ohio State, who's a pure left tackle. Now, he is coming off a torn ACL last year, but he should be completely healthy to go by training camp per all reports. And he played high level football against elite talent. Obviously, was there when CJ Stroud entered the league at Ohio State. Very familiar there with Stroud. I think that makes sense for Houston to just go up at this point, get their tackle, and I think Denver is one of the most likely trade back teams out of all of the teams in the draft. That leads us to Sheduer Sanders falling right into the Steelers' lap. Now, I am recording this before the Pat McAfee um, big night out on Wednesday night. So if Aaron Rodgers does become a Pittsburgh Steeler, it probably would happen already by then. But regardless, I think Pittsburgh sees this as they're a quarterback away. They moved off Russell Wilson. They moved off Justin Fields. They know how bad the offense was. They're first in the league in defensive spending. We always talk about Mike Tomlin's knack for being a art of defensive guy, right? Getting the most out of his guys. Don't turn the football over, this, that, and the other, and how great of a culture the Steelers are. I think Shador would be absolutely in love with DK Metcalf and George Pickens eventually, obviously, there for Pittsburgh, even if he has to sit behind A Rod for a year. I think no matter what, whether it's a Jalen Milroe, Jackson Dart, Sheduer Sanders, I think Shador's the one that falls here. With him, it's really athleticism. There's thoughts that he is not as athletic at the NFL level than he was at the college level. And if he can make tight window throws, because outside of Travis Hunter, he did not do that at Colorado. He was running for his life most of the time. So there's real question about what kind of NFL quarterback he is, but with the right seasoning, with the right coaching, I don't know if Arthur Smith is that guy for the Steelers, but I think Shador comes in at number 21. Chargers need a tight end, and there's a guy in Michigan. I mean, it makes perfect sense. Colston, Loveland, good hands, consistent blocker. Jim Harbaugh knows him all day long. The second best tight end on the board here. I think Colston Loveland goes to the Chargers. Green Bay's number one need is a number one wide receiver. And I think Migbe and Jigba out of Ohio State is another JSN. He's another Chris Olave, another Marvin Harrison, another you name them. Ohio State is wide receiver factory. They get, in my opinion, the second best receiver on the board. Listen, could Dallas take him? Absolutely. Could even a team like Seattle, as we talked about, yeah. Could even the Chargers? We know they need weapons outside of Wayne McConkey, yeah. Could Indianapolis? Sure. Could Arizona? Sure. I mean, there are teams that need receivers, but you just sort of feel like with the depth of receivers in this draft, and that the top and graded talent are more so on the defense side of the ball. We're going to see a run of receivers in the second and third round. For Green Bay, their number one need is without a doubt a receiver. So wherever they're at, they're going to take a receiver. Now, Derek Ammon out of Oregon, he's 6'5", 310 defensive lineman. He's got a great motor. Vikings need to get after the pass rush better, so Brian Flores, the defensive coordinator, does not have to blitz as much. He's a hybrid player that can play both on the inside and the edge. We know Brian Flores loves to mix his formations around. I see him a little bit like a Christian Barmore in New England, those types of players. We know what Brian Flores came from and the types of players he looks for on the defense side of the ball. Again, Minnesota, they got the offensive line, they got the weapons, they got their young quarterback in JJ McCarthy. I think their biggest need here is anything on defense, and at this point, to me, Derek Harmon is the best player available. At number 25, this is where the Texans were originally. Remember, in my mock draft, Denver trades back. They get Nick Skirton, who's an edge at Texas A&M. I talk about Sean Payton's history of taking linemen with first picks as opposed to skill position players and saving that for later in the draft. And Vance Joseph over there in Denver, he does run a 3-4 defense, which is the scheme that Nick Skolden will run. And he can get after the passer, which Denver was one of the best teams in the league and sacked last year. You sort of feel like without that top end talent, it's going to regress back to the means, but I think that Nick Scroton will help them out there. Now, the Rams, they let go of Cooper Kupp. A lot of thinking here that they could go after another wide receiver, but they did grab Devontae Adams to pair up with Puka Nakua. I think they're going to try to let this window open for Matthew Stafford a little bit more. They got so many young players on defense that I think their biggest need is left tackle that I still don't think they filled once Andrew Whitworth retired post Super Bowl. So I like Alvin Banks, the offensive tackle out of Texas. He's athletic for tackle. He's a big forward. He's got a strong base. Does not get beat by power a lot, and I think the Rams solidify their left tackle on the future. Now, Baltimore, they just take the second edge out of Texas A&M. We just talked about Nick Scruton going to Denver. The Ravens run a very similar style defense with defensive coordinator Zach Orr. Shedeur Stewart, he's just less bendy and less consistent than Nick Scruton, but a lot like Jared Verse and the two guys the Rams drafted last year to Florida State. These guys, Braden Fisk, and Jared Verse. These two guys are very similar, though I think they could go back to back. They could go every other pick. They're going to be drafted very similar apart. Now, the Lions already have Terrion Arnold on their roster, who was a very handsy corner coming out of Alabama. They knew he needed work. He gets physical, but sometimes he didn't get his head turned around. Even though Aaron Glenn is still not there, Dan Campbell and Brett Holmes are still there, and the identity that they are looking for. And outside of defensive line, their biggest need is corner. They certainly could take a guy like a Darius Alexander out of Toledo, a Jalen Walker out of Georgia. If Derek Harmon is still there, I could see him going to Detroit. But because he's so much like Arnold, that's who he's compared to. I think Trey Amos, the corner out of Ole Miss, is going to be there for Detroit at 28. That's who they take. At 29, again, I think the Commanders, they're trying to rebuild their defensive line. Jonathan Allen is out the door right now. Deron Payne's going to be out the door here pretty soon. So, anytime you got a guy coming from Toledo like Quinyon Mitchell in the first round of the draft, to me, it shows they're going to be a good football player. And that's what Darius Alexander is going to be for a Commanders defense, who they added Marshawn Lattimore last year at the trade deadline. But with the addition of Deebo Samuel at wide receiver, that is their biggest need right now is secondary and more pass rush off the edge to deal with Jalen Hurts and Philadelphia Eagles in the NFC East. Buffalo, they take the best player available on this board at this point. We know, Matt Milano and the sort of shuffling they did on defense the last few years. I think Jalen Walker, who can play all three linebacker positions, he attacks the football. He goes on that high profile defense in Georgia. It's a very Sean McDermott Buffalo Bills pick at 30. And at 31, we know Gray's Apple. He's an offensive lineman out of North Dakota State University. He played both left and right tackle. We know Kansas City, what they like is those versatility guys that can play guard, they can play tackle, they can play both sides as they try to figure out who their offensive linemen are going to be for the future with the loss of Joe Tooney to Chicago. I think that's such an Andy Reid pick. Get a guy from a small school, develop him, because Andy Reid knows offensive linemen. Of course, he was a former offensive lineman himself. And that leads us to my Super Bowl world champion, Philadelphia Eagles at 32, whose biggest need, in my opinion, is defensive lineman and corner. And I think the Eagles, we saw them move off of guys like a Milton Williams this past off season, like Josh Sweat. You saw them potentially even move off a guy like a Dallas Goedert, right? And Darius Slay moved on. So there's going to be a lot of new on that defense side of the ball. I think Howie Roseman's going to try to not pay a first round pick. I think you look at you get two twos and two threes, or maybe even a two and two threes, and try to get depth on the roster that way. And I think just like the Eagles in 2018, right? When they won the Super Bowl against the New England Patriots, that following draft, Lamar Jackson slipped down to 32 after guys like Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold, and then Josh Allen, and then Josh Rosen went in the top 10. Lamar slips all the way to 32. The Ravens come up and grab him, and the rest is history. I think the New York Football Jets, I predict, or it could be the Cleveland Browns, who had 33, which, maybe Philadelphia moves back one pick. And that way you pay a second round guy versus paying a first round guy, which, to be honest with you, makes a lot of sense. And, Andrew Berry came from Philadelphia, and his brother even works in the Eagles organization currently. So that also makes a ton of sense. So, this could be the Browns, but I'm going to go with the New York Jets and Aaron Glenn, who surprised the whole world. And even though they signed Justin Fields for 2 years, from all reports out there, they had a good workout, as did Cleveland, I should say, with Jalen Milroe, the quarterback out of Alabama, who I talked about with Christian Eden this past week. Very good athletic guy. Gonna need to develop better from the pocket, but he reminds me a lot of a Jalen Hurts, of a Lamar Jackson when they came out of school, where their athleticism is just going to win them games. He cannot start right away. He's not going to start right away in the league. That's why I think having Justin Fields, or even if Cleveland were to bring in a Kirk Cousins, to be there to mentor Jalen Milroe. But I think if developed properly under the right coaching, this kid could be something. So I have three quarterbacks going in the first round. Cam Ward going to Tennessee at 1. Sheduer Sanders going to Pittsburgh at 21. And then the Jets trading up with Philly at 32 at the end of the first round to get Jalen Milroe. I think this is a very heavy defensive line, offensive line, defensive back field first round with not a ton of trades. You can make a case New Orleans just stays at 9 and take Warren instead of moving back. But again, I think they have so many olds, and Miami to me will likely not take him. So that would be a good trade to get more picks. I think Denver, Sean Payton loves to trade back. That's his history. I think he's a good candidate there. And I just mentioned Philadelphia's history with trading back, and Howie Roseman loves making draft night deals. So that is my official 2025 NFL mock draft. Let me know how you think I did in the comment section below, whether you're listening to us on video or audio. Like that clip from the Brands World podcast? If so, make sure you go down there and hit that subscribe button. While you're down there hitting the subscribe button, make sure to also hit the notification bell so you never miss another upload. And make sure you check out all the other clips from the Brands World podcast right here on YouTube.